Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. We're back with the final roster predictions for the Chaos Forces, and this time we're looking at Tzeentch. As before, we'll be drawing inspiration from the official Khorne roster reveal and using my knowledge of the lore and the tabletop backgrounds to more or less guess what we'll get for the Tzeentchian forces. So as a quick recap, Khorne is focused around hard-hitting brutality, very up in your face. Slaanesh is focused around skirmishing cavalry and just being able to have high mobility. Nurgle is focused around slow-moving but extremely tough and quite hard-hitting units. And now we come to Tzeentch, possibly the most radically different of them all. You see, Tzeentch's armies in both lore and tabletop were very strange. The mortal armies were very well rounded. You would be able to have a lot of hard-hitting melee infantry and so on. The roster for Tzeentch Chaos Warriors was mostly focused around that of a balance, very similar to that of Chaos Undivided. However, the demon roster of Tzeentch is extremely focused on magic, so much so that the Tzeentchian units were very glass cannony. They could do a lot of damage from afar. They actually had a decent amount of range units too, but the moment they got caught up in close combat, well, it was kinda game over. So a bit of a healthy mix of the two might work out, but with all that being said, let's jump into my predictions for the Tzeentch roster for Warhammer 3. We'll start off with the possible legendary lord. Of course, that will likely be Kairos Fateweaver, the two-headed Lord of Change, one of the most powerful spellcasters in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, who in the tabletop had access to pretty much almost every single lore of magic. It was a strange mechanic in the tabletop, as each head acted as a different character in a certain sense. Each head had access to different laws of magic, mainly split between the main ones, and both of them knowing the lore of Tzeentch. I hope this does get represented in some way. It would be a shame if only a few spells per lore were actually added in for him, instead of having access to all laws of magic, though even then that might be a tad too overpowered considering the power level when it comes to different laws. Again, this character makes perfect sense because he is the main character for the Tzeentch armies when it came to the Demons of Chaos army book, and he is probably the most well-known character. Plus, Kairos was always a big fan favorite, so I guess Creative Assembly are probably gonna go with a fan favorite anyway. But now let's start moving to the generic Lord options, and of course first we have the Exalted Lord of Change. Giant avian-like demons which are very proficient at spellcasting, often knowing the lore of Tzeentch and the lore of metal. These are decently fast-moving characters, and funny enough were decent enough to deal out melee damage on the tabletop. However, the fact that they have no armor and they're a Tzeentchian demon makes them very squishy. I'd be more worried about them earlier on prior to recent announcements. Now that we know that the Bloodthirsters are able to fly, it's very likely that the Lords of Change will be able to fly too, which means that you'll be able to keep them safe. Well, at least from melee units, they'll still be a massive flying target for anything that's ranged, but at least they're safer from one enemy. Heralds of Tzeentch are also expected. As with Khorne, it seems that Heralds are being pushed up from Hero to Lord option, which adds a bit more for Tzeentch. The Herald of Tzeentch itself is a smaller version of that of the Lord of Change. Well, completely different in terms of aesthetic, but I mean in terms of unit size. So with this, you can have a Lord option riding or charging across with your other army units. Again, this is a character that is expected to have the lore of Tzeentch and the lore of metal, one or the other, so you've already got two decent lores. The lore of metal is quite good, as we know. The lore of Tzeentch we've yet to see, but it's expected for it to be pretty decent. On the tabletop, the Heralds of Tzeentch also had two possible mount options, the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch or the Disc of Tzeentch. Now, the Burning Chariot is, well, a chariot, but the difference is it could be able to fly. The Disc of Tzeentch is just a singular disc that is also able to fly. For that, maybe the Burning Chariot will be turned into a ground unit as not to provide too many flying options? It's very hard to say here because it could benefit from a flying chariot, but the last thing you want is a whole army of flying units because unless they add in the toggle, it's going to be a bit of an issue. The difference between both mounts is the Burning Chariot was used in melee combat quite often, and you were able to have an upgrade option to have a flamer weapon, which always is very useful, as you can imagine, when dealing with big stacks of enemy infantry. The Disc of Tzeentch, on the other hand, for the Herald of Tzeentch, was more to move around quite quickly. This was a highly mobile mount option which would allow you to get behind enemy lines or get away if you had to. It's more of a support effort when it comes to your spellcasting more than anything else. Next we'll go on to the hero options, and first off we can start off with the Iridescent Horror. This was the unit champion for the horror units back in the day, but as we are aware with the Khorne armies, their unit champions have been elevated to hero position. This would act exactly the same way as the Herald of Tzeentch. And that's perfectly fine, as a spellcaster unit would work very well. Now you might be expecting that the Chaos Cultist for Tzeentch might end up being a spellcaster. The RPG book actually does have a spellcaster variant which is a mortal follower, well more of a mutant than anything. However, I think that Tzeentch will greatly benefit from a melee heavily armored character here. Maybe with a few spells or two, but the main thing is Tzeentch's armies, as we'll get to now, are quite squishy, so having a character which is built to take on some melee damage is probably the best situation. Having magic all the time is very useful, that's true, but the fact of the matter is that if your units aren't geared for melee combat, you're gonna have a bad time. Let's move on now to the basic units, which would be the Pink Horrors and Exalted Pink Horrors. So these were a very curious unit on the tabletop, seeing as they were not only an infantry unit, but they were also a spellcaster. They generated magic same as a normal wizard. There's two ways that this could be done about this. They could be a wizard, but then again that would spend your winds of magic and so on, or they could have bound spells. It could be rather interesting if the horrors were implemented as a range unit. In most games this is normally the case, even in Dawn of War they were a basic range unit and that's pretty much it. So if they're implemented as a range unit with a bound spell, this could work out quite well, as that gives them some variety. Maybe the bound spell is a way that as it does damage it could regenerate ammunition or something. Now, an interesting mechanic that they had on the tabletop was that when you killed a pink horror, it would transform into a blue horror. This is a mechanic we already have in play in Total War Warhammer 2, where if a Hellpit Abomination died, it would have the chance at summoning some clan rats, which works rather well. It can be done here. If a unit of pink horrors gets destroyed, then it should have the chance at summoning two weaker blue horror units. But that all being said, it would be cool if we also had access to blue horror units too. This would be in the form of recruitable low tier chaff, as something as a unit tar pit in a sense. They wouldn't have to be magical in nature, instead just a pure tar pit. A unit like that would be highly beneficial for Tzeentch, because if most of your stuff is moving around trying to cast some spells, you obviously need something to hold the enemy down. Now yes, mortal followers will be able to do that themselves, we'll cover that in just a few short seconds. However, in the original interview, Creative Assembly had stated that they want to make the demons the main focus of everything, where the mortals are just there if you want to use them. In regards to mortals, I think that Tzeentch would benefit greatly from standard Chaos Warriors, of course. Great weapons, halberds, and sword and shield would probably be the best for them, maybe even some Chaos Chosen variants if they wish to switch that out instead, as obviously heavier armor and something to be able to hold down your enemy works well. Next we move on to cavalry, and interestingly enough, Tzeentch does have access to his own unique cavalry. These are the Burning Chariots of Tzeentch, which were flaming chariots in a sense. Think of these as chariots mounted by warpfire throwers. Essentially that's how they worked, and it could be quite interesting to have a highly mobile range cavalry. They'd still be fairly decent in close combat, as the screamers weren't too bad, but they shouldn't be stuck in close combat if you get what I mean. Instead, mortal-wise, Tzeentch would likely benefit greatly from Chaos Knights of Tzeentch, a heavy cavalry unit which would be able to act as support for the Burning Chariots. Moving on to Monsters of Beasts, we'll start off with something very expected, Chaos Furies of Tzeentch. A fairly fast-flying Chaos Chaff unit, nothing too special about them, but it's always good to have some chaff when it comes to any army. Seekers of Tzeentch would act as a flying chaff unit, which would be very similar to that of the Chaos Warhounds, just much faster. They're known to be quite decent in melee combat, nothing too special, but you'd be able to use them for a multitude of different reasons. Have them flank around and try and pick out any straggling units or war machines. Possibly have a second variant which is focused around anti-armor. It might help out just by splitting up the Screamers to be able to do something special like that. And since they have the same functionality as Chaos Warhounds, it's likely that we won't have any unless the Screamers are made a little tougher, which then brings reason to bring in some Chaos Warhounds as a chaff unit once again. As for a proper Beastmen unit, I had to think about this for a while, as, you know, it comes to the case of what could work really well for Tzeentch, and after that I came to the conclusion it could be best to have a Tzeentchian Cygor. Cygors are fairly magical in nature, cursed to see the winds of magic, so they are quite mad, and it has that link towards Tzeentch. Not only that, but it gives Tzeentch the artillery unit that they're very much lacking. As so far we've had some fast moving, we've had some magic, but we've not really had anything from a very long range, so Cygors really do fill this area quite well in terms of missing units. Plus, in regards to the versatility of Cygors, this works out quite well. Artillery for a while, but if needed to, you can bring them up into close combat and use them as a melee unit, again keeping your spellcasters safe, which I feel should be quite an important aspect in regards to the Tzeentchian playstyle. It just fits very well. Lastly, Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch. I mean, you can't have the faction focused around mutation without any Chaos Spawn, and the fact of the matter is, that again, this Chaos Spawn are very melee focused. Being Unbreakable 2 would be highly beneficial for Tzeentch, as of course, when it comes to Tzeentch, you want something that is going to be able to take a few punches. There's not much to explain here, we've already seen how Chaos Spawn work, and it just makes so much sense for Tzeentch. But now we move on to artillery and war machines, which yes, the Cygor could have fit into that too. First up we have the Flamers of Tzeentch, which were always classified as infantry, but they might be best served in their true lore representation rather than that of the tabletop, where they acted very similar to Warp Fire Throwers for the Skaven, and it kind of works quite well. That means that you have something constantly doing damage to that of random enemy infantry. They'd be fairly fast moving, and yes, you would also have the option to take them in a chariot form too, but I'd see the chariot form being much less as they're highly mobile, and the actual flamer unit on foot, well, they have no feet, being much more numerous. Plus, let's just be very honest here, flamer weapons are pretty fun when it comes to the Skaven, so imagine it when it comes to the Flamers of Tzeentch, which have more mobility, you'd be able to move them around far quicker, and it could be able to fire at an angle. The Soul Grinder again could be a good idea for Tzeentch, but this is if it's changed a little bit. Rather than focusing on artillery fire as you would expect for, say, Nurgle, or heavy melee combat when it comes to Khorne, it could be interesting if the Soul Grinder was the ultimate flamer unit. Massive, able to do melee combat without a problem, but its main thing would be focused around having 2 attached flamers or something. I think that would be kind of cool, as you could throw it right into the middle of an enemy horde and just watch it wreak havoc. Lastly, we have the Lord of Change, and I'm putting it in artillery for a certain reason. In fact, right before anything, I think I forgot the original Great Unclean one when it came to the Nurgle roster prediction, and if that's the case, I'm very apologetic about that. I don't know how that slipped my mind. But going back into Tzeentch, why the Lord of Change would be a artillery unit is mainly because I'm thinking it will have a lot of bounce spells, mainly focusing around being able to do some damage and so on. As much as it is a large monster and it is expected to fly, we don't really expect the Lord of Change to be a melee monster. I mean, the Lords of Change themselves were always quite the squishy character when it came to the tabletop, so it would make a lot more sense if it was focused around dealing some magic via bounce spells, and after you ran out of those bounce spells, that would be the time where you would send it to do some actual melee combat. But how it's always worked in the tabletop, and it still works in the tabletop, is it's still relatively very squishy. You don't want to have it up close and personal, or it's going to die. I'd say this is a fair assumption when it comes to a possible roster for Tzeentch. Of course, this is pure speculation, and some of you guys might have some other ideas in mind, so if you do, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Birch, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel has been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.